Ready to roll? Good evening, everybody. Kia ora koutou. I'm Phil Goff, Mayor of Auckland, and thank you for joining us this evening to talk about our emergency budget and in particular our rates postponement policy. Tonight I'm joined by Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, all the way from Kawakawa Bay, and Pippa Coombe, the ward member for Waitemata, all the way from just down the road, I suspect. We also have with us Andrew Duncan, who will be giving us a brief presentation on the rates postponement policy, and Edward Tuiavi'i, who will act as a facilitator, taking the questions and directing them. I can't be with you all evening this evening, so I'll be here probably for the first half of the proceedings, but Deputy Mayor Cashmore and Councillor Coombe will be here for the full proceedings. Firstly, a very brief introduction. This is a consultation on our new proposals set out for consultation in our emergency budget. This is, I think, the first time Council has had to do an emergency budget, and it is, of course, occasioned by COVID-19. The impact that it has had on the income of council. As a result of largely non-rates revenue falling, council has had a drop in income of around $525 million. That's $500 million for the coming year. And that has, I think that's worth, Andrew, it's about a 12% cut to our revenue. That has a pretty dramatic effect. As a result of that, council has to bring its spending to broadly be in match with our income, and that means that in the coming financial year we'll become a smaller organisation with a drop in staff numbers. It means that many of our staff have volunteered to take a pay cut for a 6-month period. It means that there will be some reduction in services, and there will be some deferral of the investment that we'd normally be making in some big construction projects for transport, for housing, and for the environment. That's all a huge challenge, but in the midst of that challenge, we're working really hard to make sure that we can keep the vital services that Aucklanders need and want us to provide. We will also be doing everything we can to keep up our spending on investment and construction, both to create the assets that our city needs, but also to help stimulate the economy, create jobs in a market where jobs will be much needed. But there's one other thing that we're very keen to do, and that is to make sure we can provide assistance to those Aucklanders who, through no fault of their own, have been dramatically affected by COVID-19. They've lost their income, maybe through a loss of job or a loss of their business, and they're not in a position to pay their rates on time. Now, we're not in the business of making life harder for people who are already under this pressure. So we've come up with a policy that will enable people to defer or postpone their rates for a period of time until they get back on their feet. And that's what the whole purpose of tonight's presentation is about. It's about how this policy will work, who may be eligible to benefit from it, and the policy we've estimated at roughly $65 million in deferred rates. Those are rates that will be paid ultimately, but cannot be paid on time because people are in a really difficult position. So welcome to tonight's webinar, and it's my pleasure now to pass across from our finance team, Andrew Duncan, who will give the presentation, and following that presentation, Edward Tuiavi'i will take questions and comments from you. We're here to listen to you, to listen to your questions, to listen to your comments. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Andrew.
Good evening. As the Mayor said, there's been a substantial economic fallout from COVID-19. The Council recognised that when the country went into lockdown and allowed ratepayers who are financially struggling to defer the payment of their fourth quarter rates from May till August this year. And while we recognise that some ratepayers may have recovered their financial position by that time, many others may not have been able to do so. particularly given the commentators forecasting more unemployment and business closures. So we're proposing an additional rates postponement scheme that'll include businesses, allow them to defer their payments, and note that this sort of proposal is consistent with what overseas institutions are recommending and with IRD's tax deferral. And looking at this policy, the Council was weighing assisting ratepayers, those who are financially stressed, with maintaining our cash flows so we can continue to deliver our services and securing the future payment. But also aware that rates are generally, while they're a fixed cost, they're a small part of the costs of most residential and ratepayers and businesses. But nevertheless, at the margin, they may be an important cost that could be affecting households and businesses. Vital for them at the margin. So we've got a new postponement scheme. And I'll step through some of the key features of this. So for a ratepayer to qualify for the postponement scheme, they need to have owned their property on or before the 26th of March when the country moved to Alert Level 4. And this means that the postponement will be available to those who've been affected by COVID-19, and it insulates the Council and other ratepayers from risky decisions that have been taken after that point, when people should have been a bit more aware of the potential economic fallout. However, we realise there could be exceptional circumstances, and there will be some room for a case-by-case assessment. Now, the scheme will be targeted to those who are financially stressed, but we won't be including government agencies, as they can rely on the support of government, or utilities who may be affected, but we still expect to have strong cash flows. And it won't be available for properties owned overseas, unless they're businesses physically operating locally. It'd be quite difficult for us to assess the extent to which these overseas owners were indeed in financial difficulty. For residential and farm lifestyle properties, it'll be available for properties that have a mortgage. We're of the view that mortgage-free properties won't be in the same sort of financial pressure that those with a mortgage. And however, if property owners are struggling, even though they are mortgage-free, they can take advantage of our existing postponement policy, which is available to people who've owned their properties for more than 2 years. We're also including not-for-profits, and where their activity is residential in nature, they'd be able to apply under the residential scheme, but they wouldn't be required to have a mortgage. So that might be entities like a rugby club. For businesses, and this, we're capping the amount of postponed rates at 20,000. Now that also applies to residential properties, but we've only got 285 out of 440,000 residential properties that pay more than 20,000 in rates. Now, for both residential and business properties, they'll be able to defer up to 20,000 per property, but also to carry forward up to 5,000 per property of any rates deferred from the fourth quarter of this year. And that's on the basis that we consider bigger businesses and properties to be better capitalised and have better access to finance, and so not having to rely on the support of the other ratepayers of the city. Only 15% of our business properties, about 5,900, pay more than 20,000 rates, and of these, they'll be able to postpone the first 20,000. This caps our cash flow risk a bit and the effect on the council's ability to invest in the city. And it also focuses our support on small and medium-sized businesses. Terms and conditions have to be in financial stress due to COVID-19. Lets you postpone your 2021 rates for a year. And we realise that not everyone who's been in this position will be able to pay all of their 2021 year rates on the 1st of July 2021. So we're going to give them a year in which to pay that back so they can spread it out over time. The postponement will terminate if the property's sold, so the rates will have to be paid off. We're not going to have any minimum equity requirement. We don't think there's much of a risk to ratepayers here because 2 years of rates is going to be less than 1% of capital value. So we're quite secure in terms of the future income stream for other ratepayers. And we will be adding a postponement fee to the postponed rates that'll cover our interest costs. So that'll make sure that other ratepayers aren't bearing that cost. We're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andrew. To our community that are tuning in this evening, I just want to encourage you now, if you've got some questions that are top of mind, either for our subject matter expert or our elected members, feel free to fire those through now. I want to open the dialogue this evening, Your Worship, with a question that I might pose to you. Are we in the situation that we're in because we were already in debt pre-COVID-19? Your Worship, any thoughts on that?
Well, we're in a very good financial position prior to COVID-19. In fact, just as we went into lockdown, we got the report from the calendar year ended 2019, and we had a healthy surplus and we were in good shape. Did we have debt? Most absolutely we did have debt, because it's quite proper to borrow to invest in capital work such as infrastructure. So probably about $9 billion worth of debt and assets. I'm just looking at Andrew here, about $55 billion worth of assets, maybe a little bit less than that. But we were in good nick, and you can tell that because the credit rating agencies had given us a AA credit rating, which is second only to the government's rating. So we were regarded as having managed our finances competently and prudently, and we were absolutely in a position to make the investment we needed to in the new infrastructure as the city grew, and we've always maintained we've lived within our budget. The thing that you don't borrow for is your day-to-day operational costs. It's a bit like a householder. You know, you can borrow to pay for your mortgage. You can't borrow to pay for the groceries, or you'll end up in trouble. So when we've suffered this big drop in income, nobody saw it coming. We're not the only ones in this situation. Then obviously, to be prudent, we've got to reduce our spending, and that's what we've done. But in a good financial position, still well regarded by financial institutions and credit rating agencies. And you know, we'll suffer a tough period for the next 12 months. But with the measures we're taking, we'll get back into shape again and resume the progress that the city's been making, and it's been significant.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. I've got a comment here from Andrew, and then I'll pose a question to you, Councillor Cashmore.
So we had a question asking whether you can postpone for an owner-occupied property or whether you can also postpone for a tenanted one. Postponement will be available for both owner-occupied properties and tenanted properties. We recognise that some landlords may have offered rent relief to their tenants. Others may be having to support their mortgage with employment, with income from other employment, and may have lost their jobs. So if there's evidence of financial hardship, then the postponement will be available in both of those circumstances.
Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead.
We've also been asked what kind of proof is required to confirm financial hardship. Well, certainly in the case of a residential ratepayer, in either of the circumstances I've just referred to, evidence that the job's been lost or that income's fallen would be one of the factors that we would take into account. But we're also looking to manage our administration costs by building on the tests that the government is doing for the support they're providing to businesses in particular. And so we'll be looking at their tests, and if someone's been approved for one of the forms of government support, then that'll be the sort of thing we'll be looking at to indicate that we should also be providing the small amount of support we can through rates postponement.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Cashmore, some of the viewers might not know this, but this is your fourth webinar and it's come up time and time again. I wonder if you had a comment to make around, see, internally council is tightening its belt. There are reductions across the board in terms of staffing numbers. What does that look like in terms of the quality of the services that council might be able to provide going forward over the next 12 months? Have you any thoughts, insights, top of mind stuff about that, Councillor Cashmore?
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you for the question. It's very pertinent. It's good to see you, Your Worship, Mr. Mayor, and Pippa here this evening, and the staff. These are unprecedented times that Auckland is facing. No one could have foreseen COVID coming. And what we can't understand or predict now is how long the downturn or recession will last, or how deep it will be. So Council has had to take in what is the most likely scenario approach, but also probably border on a bit of, feel conservative around that, because we don't want to be delving into this twice. So we're looking at projecting out a $525 million shortfall, as the Mayor has said. That's a huge stack of cash out of our revenue basket. And one of the ways we can balance that is by reducing staff costs. And we already have put off contractors and some temporary staff, around 1,100. And we've asked our staff to take pay cuts, to take 4-day weeks for 4 days pay, and to give up some other entitlements. Large numbers of our staff have agreed to take 10% pay cuts. Some of the ELT have taken voluntary 20% pay cuts. The Mayor has said he will give up 20%, and I'm giving up 20%. Councillors are giving up whatever they can, but there are many people who work for us, including some elected members, who are not in a position to give up their salary. They might have dependents, they might have big mortgages, and it's not right or correct for us to delve into their personal circumstances. This is a voluntary thing. It's really pleasing to see the numbers of people who have stepped up to take this initiative to help their city out. And I commend the council staff and those at Auckland Transport and our other CCOs who have volunteered this. It's great to see. However, we have to be very careful. Council is a service providing organisation. We give things to our community. We organise things, we plan things. And therefore we've got to keep a capacity and quality in our staff to provide the right sort of services back to our community. It's very simplistic for people to run around on the outside, be uninformed and say, cut this, cut that, cut all the salaries. You've got to compare our salaries to those in the private sector. And I would suggest to you, because I'm a private sector person, that council staff are paid significantly less than the private sector. And we have lost staff literally all the time to the private sector and to government. But people feel a sense of duty to council. I've been so impressed with the people who have come to work for council just because they want to give back. People who are head of the biggest engineering firms in this country. People who are the head of international financial institutions. Take massive salary cuts to work for Auckland Council because they want to give back. And that's laudable. And it goes right through our organisation from top to bottom. And I thank all those people for that. However, as the Mayor says, we have to downsize. And that means people, in some cases, will lose their jobs or have more restricted hours. And that's a tragedy. It may only be for a short time. Then we can rebuild and come out of this. It is also, Eddie, really critical that council be in a position going forward that we can actually help with the government and help our businesses and industries deliver a renewed and reinvigorated economy post-COVID. If we are so downtrodden and downbeat financially that we are unable to help, we will be of no use to the reborn, the regrowing of this city and this nation. So we need to be in a position, as we were prior COVID, of financial strength and capability to continue to deliver. And that capability in council is people critical. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Your Worship, I wonder if you might have a comment to make. Now, I understand that the second option that we're proposing is to alleviate the financial burden or stress on our ratepayers. And it's come up time and time again before, but I wondered, Your Worship, if you had a comment to make on the notion that, well, it's just as simple as stopping some of the things that we're doing, plugging the hole that we've got, and then carry on with business as usual. Is that not possible, Your Worship?
Yeah, look, we've looked at all options, and it's been a good and constructive collaborative effort between local boards and the governing body of council. When you've got to find savings of 525 million, you won't find them in one place. There'll be a range of different things that we have to do. But, you know, there's obvious things that you could cut, and we've resisted doing it. Our library services, for example, 500,000 Aucklanders a week use our libraries. Now, in some instances, we might have narrowed down the opening hours a little, but all of our libraries have reopened at this point. We're looking at areas that we can defer in terms of the construction of big projects, because when your revenue goes down, the amount that you can borrow against your revenue to invest in construction of infrastructure also decreases. But the word there is deferral. The projects are not going. We're keeping them going. Things like the Eastern Busway, which is we're just putting another $700 million worth, but that's because the eastern suburbs really do need a busway. There are a range of other things that are important, not just because of the assets they create for our city, but we're entering into a recession that could be as bad as anything we've seen in our lifetimes. You'd have to go back to the 1930s. Now, if we slashed all of our expenditure, we would be contributing to the problem. What we're trying to do is to keep some of those big projects going, so that we're creating jobs, we're letting people earn incomes, and we can bring forward the recovery. And I think that recovery, looking optimistically, might come earlier rather than later. Great news from the Prime Minister this afternoon that we're into level 1 tomorrow. I was going to go down tonight and see what the bars look like at 11:59 tonight, but I think I'll probably be tucked up in bed by that time. So we'll have to sell some properties, and these are largely non-strategic properties. We will increase our debt on the margins just for the coming year, but within the limits that the boundaries that are set by the credit rating agencies. Because if we were to just go out and borrow the money, what that would mean is that we'd probably suffer a credit rating decrease. Now, one notch down on our credit rating costs you $210 million over a decade. 2 notches down, $450 million. So we're being sensible about it. We're trying to get a mixture of policies that will ease back on our spending, but not too dramatically affect the key services we provide to our people that rely on those services, keep as much of the construction going as we can, and then just work our way back into a position where we can again get a balanced budget, which we would hope we'd be able to do within a year, 18 months. So that's the general approach that we've taken. No easy answers in this one, but making decisions that are prudent, that are wise management of our finances, that look after the people, like we're doing with this rates postponement property. And we are putting out there for consideration whether the rate increase in the coming year should be 2.5% or 3.5%. Let me just give you an idea of what that means for the average ratepayer. For the ratepayer paying the average amount of rates, a 2.5% rate increase is another $1.35 a week on your rates. For a 3.5%, it's $1.82. We're not talking about the sums of money that are going to cause hardship for people, but we are recognising that there's been an income drop, and we are asking Aucklanders, if Aucklanders opt for a higher rate increase, then we can provide more of those services that would otherwise have to reduce. We can do more of the investment that'll get more people into employment and create assets for the future. So we're going out genuinely to listen to and to consult with people, hear what they want, what their priorities are, and to get some sense from them as to whether the package that we collectively, and I've got to say unanimously as councillors put together, we're all working together on this to find a way through, just to get some feedback from those of you out there that are our ratepayers, our residents, our constituents, and to make sure that we're on the right track.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. I've got a comment from Andrew Duncan, and then I've got a question for you, Councillor Coombe.
So I've had a question about what other support the council can offer to ratepayers who are struggling financially. So the council administers the government's rates rebate scheme that can provide over $600 of support for paying rates for those ratepayers on low incomes, and would encourage people who feel they are struggling to approach get in touch with the call centre and see if they're eligible for that assistance. And we've also, in addition to the postponement scheme I referred to, we have our normal postponement policy, which is available if you've owned your residential property for 2 years and live in it. and help with design of payment plans, shifting from quarterly to weekly payments to assist ratepayers also.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Coombe, at the end of the Mayor's reflections there just a moment ago, he mentioned that there were no easy answers, and that's absolutely true. If we think about the campaign that we're running at the moment to get Aucklanders across Tāmaki Makaurau to engage with us, the strapline is effectively stronger together. And as we segue into sort of a different part this evening, Councillor Coombe, have you any thoughts to offer our listeners, our viewers this evening in terms of the importance of the call to action to make a submission? Because for the last couple of webinars that we've had, all the elected members have been unanimous in coming out and saying, we want to hear from you. We cannot do this without you. Any thoughts from you, Councillor Coombe?
Kia ora, thank you for the question, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for joining the webinar and leading this evening. Deputy Mayor and officers for supporting the webinar. I'm really pleased to be able to be here. We are very much in unprecedented times, and this is the first time that Council has consulted on an emergency budget. And I think we've already seen in the first week about 11,000 responses, which is about at least of 10 times the rate of response that we would normally see just in the first week. And I think part of that is because there is a call to action. People are hearing that this is a really important process. Like, it's not often that Council is consulting on such a significant issue. And so this is quite an historic time to be giving feedback and setting the direction of Council's budget, and also highlighting what is important to Aucklanders. We've come through the COVID crisis in quite good shape, and it's very exciting that we're moving to level 1 this evening. We're now moving into a new phase of recovery and rebuild, and I think everybody has got a view on how we should do that. And the crisis has also highlighted how much of an importance Council actually does play to our day-to-day lives. Like, we often hear that Council should just stick to our core activities. Well, our core activities go far beyond roads and rubbish and regulations. And we've seen that in the response to the crisis, that we've needed Auckland Council to respond in all sorts of different ways, and providing services and support to the most vulnerable, services all across Auckland, even when we've been in lockdown. So I guess my point is that now we're thinking about rebuild and recovery and rebuild. I think everybody can contribute to that conversation and give us feedback about what the priorities are and where we need to focus our budget, balancing that with the fact that we've had this huge hit to revenue. So we're going to have to make some hard choices. So I think this process is a really, if there's any time to engage with Council, this is really it.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe. Mayor Goff and Councillor Cashmore and Coombe, if you'd like as well. There's a strong sense out there. There's a lot of sentiment around, well, zero. It's hard on everybody. These are hard, turbulent, pressing times. Never mind 2.5 or 3.5. I'm sure 0% would be, better. And I guess to sort of flesh that out a bit, there's an underlying kind of a sense out there that we've not exhausted all avenues. We've not talked to central government. We've not done everything that we can. Your Worship, have you any thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, when we worked through the policy in response to the need for an emergency budget, we did look at all options. And yep, certainly, I'm getting a mixture of views actually. Some people, on social media are saying to me, or in the street, look, 0 would be nice. A lot of other people saying, hey, look, you're only talking about a couple of bucks a week. I'd rather pay a bit more actually, and make sure that we could bring forward, improving that water quality, that we could make sure that our parks are and our playgrounds are in pristine state, that our libraries are fit for purpose. So there's a whole mixture of views out there, as you'd expect in our democracy. We're not all clones of each other. But when we looked at what zero rates would mean, it would mean severe slashing of our services. It would mean much less. We'd be talking about several $100 million less in investment in our infrastructure for environment, for housing, for transport. It would mean, according to the chief executive, the potential loss of up to 900 further jobs on top of the the 1,100 that have already been given notice as short-term contract workers or temp workers. And what we have to do is find that balance. We want to live in a city which is a great city to live in, which means it's got to have good services. You expect your rubbish to be picked up on time each week. You expect the water services to be there. You expect the libraries and the pools and the community facilities to be available to you. You want to make sure that we're making the investment in transport safety and maintenance of our roads. All of these services are critical, but they all have to be paid for. And I guess in politics, for a long time, I've found some people that say, look, mainly when I was in central government, hey, look, we want you to cut our taxes, but we want you to provide better services. And by the way, we want to make sure that you balance your budget. Now, you know that there's a limit. You can't do all of those things at once. What we're trying to do is find a balance, give people a choice about the rate level that they may have, but make sure that we deliver on our obligations to our public to keep those key services going, to keep this city as a great place to live, to make the investment for future generations, to clean up our water quality, to do stuff about climate change. And to do that, it's not a huge impost on everybody. When you have a rate increase, as I said, 2.5% is $1.35 more a week. When we went out in the last long-term plan and we said to people, would you be prepared to pay a targeted rate to improve our water quality and to enhance our environment? And 2 to 1, people said to us, yes. It's only a couple of dollars, and we want you to get on and do this. This is important to us. This is our birthright for our kids to have beaches we can swim in. And they do want us to continue to make that progress, and we're determined to do that. So what we're doing is putting a choice before people. We're giving them the implications of those choices. And to, again, to get straight to your point, a zero rates increase would mean a slashing of services and a dramatic cutback in the building of infrastructure for transport, for environment, for housing that we critically need. Long after the effects of COVID-19 are gone, we've got to get back to those key challenges of making this a great city to live in by having a public transport system that works, dealing with congestion, dealing with pollution, cleaning up the harbours, making sure that the infrastructure is there for the housing. That's what local government's about. That's what we're working to achieve. But we also know that people have been affected by this in their incomes, and we're trying to protect the people who need to be protected. Our rate increases that we're proposing, for the last 3 years, our rate increase has been the lowest of any city in the country. And now we're looking at rate increases that will still be, I believe, lower than any of the other big growth cities like Tauranga and Hamilton. Might not be as small as a town like Waitomo, where there's no population increase and no need for extra spending. But we're trying to keep those rates reasonable. And the last point I'll make is we're also looking for value for money. Every dollar we spend, we want to know whether that is getting the best value we can for the people that we're serving. So we're finding efficiencies, stopping duplication. One of the reasons why the cuts in our services are as hard as they are is because we've been through the last 3 years, and anything that looks like it's not working efficiently or there's fat in the system, we've cut back. We've made savings to reinvest in services. So yeah, I think that's probably a summary to your question.
Thank you, Your Worship. To our community, if you're just joining us tonight, we have Mayor Philgoff, Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, and Councillor Coombe this evening, along with Andrew Duncan. Councillor Cashmore, off the back of the Mayor's reflections this evening, and I can appreciate that you've aptly summed this up in previous webinars, there's the sentiment out there that difference between 2.5 and 3.5 is 47 cents. And some sort of come to grasp that, and others are still of the understanding that some of the assumptions are flawed, and you would have heard some of it last night. You know, the libraries and the pools, and when we go back down to level 1 tonight at midnight, and tomorrow, just like that, the uptake will be there. And I just wondered if you had a comment, Councillor Cashmore, potentially Andrew, this evening, around some of those assumptions that we made based on that projection of income sort of continuing to dive before it recovers again. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Eddie. And it's a really good question because, as I said earlier on, we've taken a fairly conservative approach to what this downturn could mean to council. So that enables us, should we get, say, closer to the end of the year and the recession is not as deep, or we're starting to move positively out of it, we can actually open up things again and start to get projects that have been deferred for a bit moving ahead. I think one of the critical points we have to recognise is that projects that are already under contract, we are committed to, and they will be completed. Ones that are in the planning stage that we have not yet issued contracts for, they could potentially be deferred, but the planning work and design work will still go on. So when they are ready to go, we can go quickly. And the government has announced a shovel ready program. That's going to come in a series of waves. The first wave is apparently due for late July, and we will find out then whether some of the projects that we've put forward, and 35 have gone to the second stage already. So how many of those 35 projects will be uplifted to have Crown funding or assistance even? And that could help fill a big hole that we've put in our Auckland Transport's budget, which is thickening the $200 million off their CapEx spend. So something from shovel ready could actually help in those areas. Keeping the projects that are alive and working and are contracted, keeping them going, keeping the people on the tools, keeping the roading going, the contracts going, keeps money going into the economy. A lot of people have said to me, just stop things. And I said, well, first of all, I'd like you to give me a list of things you want me to stop. And secondly, let me tell you about the cost of stopping doing things. Because let's say you stop building a bridge, it's half built. You have to cover the reinforcing. You have to protect the concrete. You have to protect the structural integrity of the foundations. All of that stuff comes at a price that is not factored into the contract. It'll be a plus on the actual contract. And that is a big plus in many cases. The best way is to carry on and finish that project. And the same thing with the environmental provisions. Yes, we'll slow things down. But in the spring when you don't mow your lawns for a month because you want to go to the beach or do that bushwalk, and all of a sudden the lawns are halfway up your calf, and you've got to take you 3 goes with a lawnmower over 2 or 3 sessions to get your lawns back in control. It's a similar sort of thing when council let things get too ragged or too tired. The cost of getting back is a lot of effort and a lot of money. So we're better to keep the provisioning, the deliveries going as best we can, taking that conservative approach, but with an eye for the big game, which will be able to uplift when we come out of this and get cracking again quickly. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. I think it's a great contribution, and little did you know that I logged onto the council Facebook page and I had a look at where we encourage people to have a say, and indeed there's a comment here that says we certainly have no need to finish all the work going on downtown to fill in the holes and leave those projects until council has the budget to finish what they started. And I guess the insinuation there is just wait till the demand's back and just wait until the money is there, and we'll resume. So I think that was quite beneficial, and you potentially killed 2 stones there. Mayor Goff, there's just before I pose another question, I just want to encourage our viewers and our listeners this evening, because this is a session or a webinar that is focused on rates postponement. Please feel free to pop your questions online and we'll address them. But in the absence of those, we'll continue having a broad and a wide-reaching discussion this evening. Mayor Goff, last week we had a comment, or it was a question about CCOs or sort of councillors as a big group. So we know what core council is doing in terms of restructures internally and everything. What sort of a commitment is there from the CCOs to also sort of pull their weight and play their part?
With the response from the CCOs, every chief executive, every chair of the board, every board member, and every member of their executive teams have agreed to take a voluntary wage cut. And that, that shows, I think, a commitment that people understand that we're in extraordinary times, and, we're not in the normal situation where we all get our normal wage increase every year. This is people not only foregoing a wage increase, it's actually taking a significant wage cut. And for the chief executives, including our own here at council, that's a 20% cut in income. Same for the deputy mayor and myself. And what we're trying to do is, of course, we're trying to protect our lower paid workers. If you're earning at the lower end of the wage, you'll probably still get a wage increase this year. If you're earning above the average wage, you'll probably get nothing. If you're earning significantly above, you'll probably take a wage cut for the last half of this year. The CCOs are also reducing their programs. So we had hoped, for example, we were going to spend 900 million on transport services, and there's a whole lot of things that are included in that. We've just bought new trains, electric trains, as we encourage more people to go on services. We're trying to electrify our bus fleet, etc. We've had to put on hold some of those things. Doesn't mean to say they won't happen. It's just they won't happen for a year's time. And Auckland Transport has made those cuts. One area where we haven't tried to cut is in the area of water care, because we know that with this phenomenal drought that we've got on at the moment, the worst in 200 years is the prediction, and unfortunately nothing much for the next week. We might have to spend more money, create new water treatment plants, create new sources of water. So we've taken it on a case-by-case basis with the council-controlled organisations where they can give up money. They have. Some of them have made quite dramatic cuts and significant cuts in their staffing as well. So again, it's a case of nobody leaving it to somebody else to take the initiative. We all need to play that part. We all need to give up something while we get through these difficulties, but we will get through them. And what makes me really confident, what was today? 101 days since we had the first case of COVID-19. And within 101 days, we're now down to no live cases, no further deaths, no new cases coming on. And just we compare ourselves with other countries in the world, United States, I know it's much bigger, but 110,000 deaths. Sweden, only twice our size, 4,500 deaths. So what have we done? We've all worked together. We've come together to make sure that we overcome this pandemic, and we have. And now that we've done that, and that's not to say that we won't get the odd case coming back, let's work together to overcome the economic consequences. And by working together, we'll create a stronger council, a stronger community, a better city, and a better country. And I'm really confident that we as Aucklanders and New Zealanders will actually do that. There are times when you feel really proud about our, what we call it, the team of 5 million. And this is a time when I do feel really proud about the way that people have come together, worked together, heeded the needs of others, and council's done that. During the worst of that COVID-19, the food parcels, we delivered something like 17,000 food parcels. We were ringing the over 70-year-olds that were isolated because they're part of our community. We weren't about to sacrifice our older people saying, well, too bad, COVID-19 will get you, but I'm young, so I don't care. We were in it together. And that's what we want to do with this difficult budget. We want to find a way of protecting those that are hurt the most. That's what rates postponement is about. And we want to find a way where we can bring our spending within our budget, with a lower income, but still provide the things that are really important and that count for Aucklanders.
Thank you very much, Mayor Goff. I know you've got to duck out momentarily. I wondered if you wanted to make a final thought or a final reflection on the importance of our community having their say, getting out, writing a submission. Do you read the stuff? How important is it for you, Your Worship, for our community to get out there and make a submission?
I think that most of us around the table, officers or elected representatives, we don't just read the stuff, we eat, drink, breathe and sleep it. I doubt that there's any member of the finance team that didn't spend the night thinking about what they were putting together. And I just want to make a big call out for our finance staff. Deputy Mayor Cashmore was talking about the shovel-ready projects. The government gave us about 2 weeks to get those ready, and those 2 weeks included Easter. And I know, because we were meeting on Easter Sunday, I know that our officers spent their time when they were, we were on a public holiday, actually working to bring these things together. So I think people have made a real effort. I think that it's been terrific. Do we take people's submissions seriously? Yes, we do. And by the way, we're getting a great return of submissions. I think many times higher than what we would for the normal annual budget, and that shows that people do understand and want to participate. What democracy is about is not making these decisions. You elect me, now I go away and do my own thing and I don't listen to what you're saying. Not about our officers saying, well, we know best for people. We put forward our best proposals. We put our heart and soul into making those proposals, but we might not always get it right. And we need to understand what you're thinking, and we need you to participate in the process. Don't just leave it to somebody else to make their influence. Please, if you're out there listening, make an effort, put a submission in, tell us what you're thinking. We do take that into account. Can we please everybody? Do everything for everybody all at once? No, that's not the real world. But we try to get all of those views together and say, okay, what is the path whereby we can carry most of our community with us, having listened to what they say, what they want, what their priorities are. So if you've got it either online or you get a hard copy, please send in your thoughts, your submissions. They make a difference in how we carry out our role. We really want to hear from you. Thank you very much for that.
Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Mayor Goff. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Councillor Cashmore, I've got a question here, and it speaks to that $525 million in lost non-rates revenue that we've broken down. And it's quite a practical question that's come through. Why has COVID stopped parking enforcement? And I think that was to the tune of about 40 million there, Andrew. Any response to that, Councillor Cashmore, or is that an Andrew question?
I've actually got in my book all the actual numbers, but I mean, if the fossil through and find them. So going off the top of my head, the city basically shut down, and we saw public transport numbers fell right off. We stopped putting out fines for people illegally parking or doing things in the city we normally charge for, simply because there was no one coming through. So all those sort of things were falling off. And with the social distancing, we didn't want to penalise people if they were coming through and the buses weren't able to run anywhere near capacity. Like, only a third could be used, a third of space could be used on buses or trains through the early stages. So there's a whole lot of rational reasons for that, to try and keep as much of the essential economy going in the business districts around Auckland. However, that hit paid a point. I think it's from memory around 45 million. And then there's hits from the loss of PT, which is massive. The government bailed out some of that, which is great. And the other hits that we've taken are, like we're talking about tonight, potentially $65 million in non-paid rates, or rates that have been deferred. Hits because we're reducing the capital program from the subsidies we get from NZTA. That's a really large number in the $60, $70 million bracket. So these things all add up to very, very large chunks of coin that we've got to find answers for. Again, remembering it is a projected amount, it's not looking back at what was actually being done. We are planning this forward. This is what we think is the most likely scenario. And therefore, if it isn't as bad as what we're thinking, we still have the opportunity to go harder and go earlier. As I've said a couple of times already tonight, the hard part about this budget is actually understanding the complexities of getting the numbers as close to right as possible. And Andrew would know that better than anybody. It is really, really difficult to second guess this stuff because we just do not actually know. So we take a conservative approach, but still be geared up, ready to up the tools if we get the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. I notice here that in one of the questions that's come through, and it's absolutely great, don't feel confined to the rates postponement. Feel free to ask anything of our elected members and also anything emergency budget related of a subject matter expert. Councillor Cashmore, there's a question here about whether we're able to move the consenting on the Waikato River. Surely getting water in will help our industry get back on their feet and employ more staff / pay rates on that time if we can get that consent heard sooner.
Yeah, thanks for the person who put that question through. It's very, very topical and front of mind right at the moment. So we actually cannot fast track Auckland's consenting process. The law of the RMA says they have to be heard in the consensual order. However, we need to accelerate the process. But first of all, we can use some provisions that currently exist within our rights out of the Waikato. So we're going to be talking, the Mayor and I are going down to the Waikato on Friday, talking to the Waikato City Council and to the Regional Council. The Mayor is meeting with Tainui the next day or two to find, okay, these are the things we're thinking about doing. We want to work with you to try and make this happen. This is a collaborative approach. The drought has affected the Waikato as well, and they are hurting. The Waikato River is at sort of record lows for this time of the year. So we need to be sympathetic to those requirements, but we also have an urgent and preeminent problem in the city to secure water for this coming summer. We need to find the solutions for that very quickly. And part of that might be desalination plants brought over from overseas, plugged in, and then refilling some of the dams in the Waitakere so the water can be treated. We need the short-term solutions that include households having a right to put in tanks to collect rainwater off their roofs to use for washing their car, garden, and flushing their toilet, as long as the stuff is safely and correctly plumbed in. Longer term, we're going to have to look at other solutions like permanent desalination and or repurposing waste. So we've got a three-stage process here. Immediate solutions to alleviate a potential problem we have this summer. Short, medium-term solutions to get that extra 200 million litres a day from the Waikato that gives us breathing space to deliver the long-term solution, which will be around infrastructure provisioning for alternative uses of the water from waste and or desalination. So it's underway. It's not been put on the back burner. It's not been slowed down. We're not hoping it just rains. I farm in the Hunua Ranges, Eddie, and all my life that I've been here, where you go right to the top of the Hunuas, I've never seen it so dry. It's been absolutely horrendous trying to farm through this process. We've actually sold half of our capital stock, and I've never even done anything like that in my life before. So this is a very serious problem we're facing. It is a drought. This is not the new standard normal, hopefully. NIWA says that under the global warming projections that Auckland will get the same amount of rain, if not more than what it has in the past, but will come differently. So there'll be heavier downpours and longer dry spells. This is just perhaps that new norm of a longer dry spell, and hopefully we are going to get those heavier downpours in the next few months, but not like the Tasman Tempest, please. Don't need that again. So the work with Watercare is ongoing. This council and Watercare collaborative approach. We want to work with the Waikato councils and the government to deliver these solutions. It's going to be touch and go. It's going to be tough, and it might get expensive, but it has to be done.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Keep your mic on, because I've got another comment here that I've taken the time to go over on Facebook and have a look. The crazy train tunnel. Can't we just put that on hold?
Yeah. So the crazy train tunnel, well, that crazy train tunnel will actually double the level of people able to use public transport by rail in the city. And it's not just for the CBD. People out of my area, Papakura and Pukekohe, will benefit. Shorter time travels, a better quality of service, and more frequent service. The Western Line, the same thing, 15 to 17 minutes off that travel into the CBD. And also across town, not everyone works in the CBD, more people work elsewhere. So people from the west heading out down south using public transport. We cannot build roading to beat congestion. In Texas, there's a 28-lane interchange, 28 lanes, and they just kept building more lanes onto it. Dallas-Fort Worth, and they finally decided it was just even not possible for them. So they've gone to a metro model. We are the same, but not at that extent, of course. But we cannot afford to keep adding more and more layers and lanes to the roading network. Public transport is the solution for cities, and it has to be taken up. And we need to do our best to make it as a frequent a service as possible, as a quality and reliable service as possible, and a service that covers the whole of the city as much as possible. At the moment, there's big chunks of urban Auckland that aren't serviced at all, that need to have a far better service provisioning, and Auckland Transport has got plans afoot to move that forward as fast as we can.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore. I think we've made a good run of answering all the questions that have been published through. So thank you to our elected members, Andrew also, and also the community for posing these questions. Councillor Coombe, before we wrap up this evening, I wonder if you had any final reflections or just anything that was top of mind for you before we say Pō Maria this evening.
Thank you. I think what comes to mind is just how important it is to read the material and have a look about what the options are before responding. The consultation summary is quite straightforward to read, and there's lots of good information on the council website about the budget. So I really would encourage submitters to have a read of the options and what the issues are before submitting, and also why, I mean, this evening we've been talking about the rates deferral policy and postponement policy, and I think this is about targeting support for ratepayers who are financially stressed, rather than giving everybody across the board a cut. And I think that targeted support is, there's good reasons for that, and why it's included in the consultation. So just really to dig into the material that's available and have a good read, and also ask any questions. I'll be on the webinar tomorrow night as well. So hopefully there's some more questions that we can cover then too. But thank you for having me along this evening.
No worries. Thank you, Councillor Coombe. I'm looking at Andrew, if you've got a final comment, and then Councillor Cashmore, any final comments? Yes, from Andrew.
If any of you tonight are thinking you'll have some difficulty with your rates, I'd encourage you to get in touch with our call centre to look at all the existing support that we can provide, and to make your submissions in regards to the remission policy, the new postponement scheme we're putting forward. We're keen to hear what you've got to say. Thank you.
Councillor Cashmore, two things. Firstly, any final thoughts or comments? And the second thing, would you do the honours of signing off after?
Sure, Eddie, thanks. And thanks, Pippa and Andrew. Tonight was about helping those people who have been hurt severely by COVID. We have people who have lost jobs, people who have lost businesses. And we want to be a compassionate council. We want to do what we can to be fair and reasonable. Also, when you're making your submissions, think about the journey that council's been on since amalgamation. Auckland has grown by 300,000 people since 2010. We have taken our capital spending program from 600 million to what was proposed this year to be 2.6 billion. It's now going to be 2.2 or 2.3. Still a very respectable number. Delivered more capital, new bridges, new wastewater treatment plants, new piping, new roads, new parks, playgrounds, libraries, pools than Auckland's ever seen before. COVID is going to slow us down for a year, hopefully no more. But looking back at what's been achieved, it's been done with savings as well. So although we have 300,000 extra Aucklanders using the services that we provide, our libraries, our parks, our playgrounds, our roads, our footpaths, our public transport, our buses, and yes, their cars, 300,000 extra people, we have still saved $270 million in real hard cash. 270 million. Operational expenditure, net operational expenditure has risen by only 1.2% on average per annum since 2010. It's a really commendable result. And other things, Auckland Council's not a business as in the normal sense of the word. I'm from the business world. And our banking in the business world is done on assets. You have land, you have buildings, you have property services or customer services that are worth something. In Auckland Council, we have assets, $50 billion worth of assets. But there are things like piping and roading and bridges and parks and playgrounds. There are things that you can't sell because your community wouldn't let you do them, and rightly so. Our debt provisioning is based upon revenue. So a direct revenue loss means that we have difficulty delivering a capital program because we have to tailor that capital program to that 270% back to revenue. Hence the capital reductions this year. Hence the savings that have to be made to operational expenditures. We don't need this to go on for too long because the hit would mean things that the community really love and appreciate, like the Mayor spoke about, the clean water on the beaches, the improving of the streams, newer and more and better playgrounds, libraries, footpaths, walking areas, regional parks, sports fields, all these things that we as a city love to use and enjoy take a hit. And the zero rates option, I'd like to end with this, means the hit would be so severe that it probably would not be a capital program. Projects that have been contracted would be stopped and council would face huge expenses from breach of contract rules. The startup costs for those projects would be substantial. It's very simplistic and populist to say things like zero rates increase, sack the staff, cut the salaries. Go and have a crack at it. Go and have a crack at it, because I've been in the business world, I've looked people in the eye and said, I'm sorry, I've got to let you go. That's not fun. That is not fun at all. People given an opportunity will do the right thing. They will put their shoulder to the wheel. And this is a time, as we're saying, Auckland is in this together. We put our shoulders to the wheel. We can help each other, look after our neighbours, look after our families, and we will come through this. Slash and burn will literally mean that. Slashed and burn. There will not be a good result. I'm quite happy to look at either 2.5 or 3.5, and I'll put my political fate on that. Zero is nothing but a nonsense. So I ask people to actually look at the material, think long and hard about what they write in their submissions, and look out their window at the things they see that council provides. You turn that tap on, that's council provisioning water. You see that bus go past, that train go past, your kids playing on the parks, kids swimming in the beaches and our rivers, enjoying our wonderful regional parks, the art gallery, the events, all these things that make Auckland so special, and a place where other New Zealanders want to come. Let's do this, Auckland. I'm sure we can make it all happen. Together, we can make it happen. Thanks, Eddie.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Cashmore, Councillor Coombe, Andrew Duncan, to all the staff that have enabled this webinar this evening, and also to His Mayor, Worship Mayor Goff this evening. To you that have joined us, thank you so much for tuning in. There are a couple of webinars left. I encourage you to sign up. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to answer your questions. Mā te wā, pō Mārie.